Now let's look at some tactics in the endgames. Tactics are very rare guests in the endgames. Well, when we see some tactics in the endgames, they are most likely themed and thematic, very thematic tactics for the endgame. But there are some very, very unusual combinations, very rare, very hard to predict and very hard to prepare. Well, here is one position. White is moving that way and black is coming the other way. White plays f7, and you see that black has no way to prevent white from queening the f pawn. And it looks like black can resign, but here comes very powerful resource for black. Black goes b4, white makes the queen, and black goes b3. Position is extremely unusual. Black is threatening b2 check and b1. White has an extra queen. However, white has difficulties winning this game, this position. Well, you can tell that b2 move is hard to prevent. Probably white can win by playing rook f2, but it's hard way to go, and because black can go in this position, rook takes f2 and playing a3, probably white is winning this position. But let me show you as a combination, very interesting resource for white. Very interesting way to win this game. Queen a3 check and rook to a2. And what is it for white to do in this position? Obviously, white cannot take black's rook, because then king will take rook, and there is no way white can win this position. And here comes absolutely shocking move, rook to f2, and black cannot take white's queen. Because if black takes white's queen, they get checkmated immediately after rook to b2, and in this position only legal move black has is rook a2, and then rook to b1 is a checkmate. So in this position it's not over yet. Black has b2 check. Now if rook takes on b2, white will never win after rook takes a3. So after b2 check, white plays queen takes b2, rook takes b2, rook takes b2, black plays a3, and the rest of it is very simple. It's typical endgame technique that has nothing to do with tactics. We're going to finish it real quick. The only winning move in this position is rook b1 check, and after king a2, rook goes back to b8 or b7, it doesn't really matter. King a1, white goes king c2, that's the only way to win, by the way. a2 check, this is already endgame part. King b3, king b1, rook h8, and black cannot make the queen, because if black makes the queen, white is going to checkmate black immediately. So in this position, black must make a knight, and white moves king c1. And in the end game, it's known that king and rook wins versus king and knight only if knight is on a corner of the board, and that's exactly where it is. After king a2, we can go rook h2 check, and on king b1, simply waiting move rook g2 wins, and on king a3, move like rook b2 wins right away. So this is an interesting combination we just saw. Let's look at another position. We know that if you have king and a queen versus king and the rook, it's a win. We know it's a win, but there are some exception positions that based on very unusual tactics. Well, here is one of these positions. Black is on the move. Black has king and rook versus queen, king and queen. Now, black plays rook a7 check, and white cannot win this position because this is an exception position where black gives perpetual check to white, and there is no way white can make progress. The reason why white can make progress, I'm going to show you the tactical part of it. Obviously, with black, we're going to check on A and B files, and if black goes to the file where their queen is on C file, then white goes on the C file, then black is going to play simply rook C7 and get the queen back. But if white tries to approach black's rook, that is not going to work either. Rook A7 check, king B5, rook B7 check, and after king A6, rook A7 check. This is a draw based on a tactical shot after white's king B6. Now you see that black does not have rook B7 check, but they have rook A6 check, which forces immediate draw because of the stalemate. White must take black's rook, and that's a stalemate. If white moves the king, black's simply going to capture white's queen. So this is a draw. This is unusual tactics. But you see, this unusual tactic in the end game, this is unusual, it's a stalemate. But stalemate is a very frequent guest in tactics, in combinations. Let's look at another position, which is very, very interesting endgame position. Well, here we have white, and there is the position. Black has bishop on d3, king on g3, and the pawn on h2. Here is the position. In this position, black is threatening to make a queen. So black is queening. White has to make a draw. This is very, very interesting and one of the most original combinations in the end game I've ever seen. In this position, white has to make a draw. Obviously, white's rook a1 move is absolutely forced. And black goes king g2, containing deadly threat of bishop f1, blocking the first horizontal, and then making the queen. All white has to do is to sacrifice rook for black's pass pawn, and then it's going to be a draw. But how can they do that? White's rook cannot leave the back rank because then black is going to queen, and white's d2 pawn blocks their second rank that white cannot play rook a2 check. So how can white draw this position? Only way to draw this position, here white makes absolutely shocking move, king to h8. That seems like a very unlikely move that can do anything for white. Black is forced to play bishop to f1, and here comes the final and absolutely spectacular move, rook to a7. Now obviously black is going to queen, and white goes rook to h7, winning black's queen, and game instantly ends in a draw. Queen is attacked, only square queen has to g1, and white gives check and captures black's queen. Now, if black tries not to queen yet after rook a7, but stop white from playing rook h7 and plays bishop d3, then white simply goes back to a1, repeating the position, and black has nothing better but playing bishop f1 and then white goes rook a7 back, and this is a draw. Very, very unusual combinations. You can hardly see them played in a game. It's a more like a composition type of combinations, but extremely difficult in 100% tactical. Well, you cannot see much sacrifices in the end game, because end game, that already means that you have one, very few, or maybe even one piece. And sacrificing that, the only piece, if you do that, most likely it's a combination on a stalemate, which that's what we saw in the previous example with king and rook versus king. Now, let's look at one extremely unusual position. Very, very unusual position. Very interesting tactically. There is the position. White has an exchange. They have rook for a bishop and a pawn. And it's hard to imagine that we're going to see a lot of tactics. Black is going this way. Black is trying to promote their pass pawn. Normally exchange rook versus bishop, when you don't have any pawns, it's not enough to win in the end games. But in this position, white can win. White goes rook to a2, attacking black's dark square bishop. And you see that black loses bishop, because if white goes knight f1, protecting this bishop, then if black goes knight f1, then white simply goes king e1, and they win one of black's minor pieces. So all black has is the only move, bishop g1, then white goes rook g2, forking two minor pieces, and looks like this is it. White won. But that's not so. That's where real struggle starts. Black plays king f3, rook to g1, and black goes king f2. White has more than enough winning material here, but they have one serious problem. Rook is in bad position. White's only way, if white loses this rook, they cannot win the game. White goes rook to e1, black goes e4, and now white has to come out with a rook in order to have winning chance. But what to do with the rook? How can rook move the e1 square? If white goes king d2, then black goes knight f1 check, and after king d1, knight e3 check, and it's simply perpetual check. So white must use their knight to help. Knight e6, black goes e3, and there is black's threat. They are threatening to go e2 check, and after king moves knight e4 check, or knight f1 check, winning white's rook. Now, normally in this position, you can only choose between two logical moves. Knight d4 to stop e2 pawn, black's pawn from moving to e2, or knight to f4. Amazingly, neither one of those moves are good. If white goes knight d4 or knight f4, black plays e2 check. And after knight takes e2, this position is unique position where black draws by playing knight to f1, and white has no defense to perpetual check. Knight e3 check, knight c4 check. Doesn't matter what white plays. Knight goes anywhere. Knight e3 check and knight c4 check. White's king cannot leave rook, and therefore it's a perpetual check in the draw. So what is to do here for white? The only winning move in this position, and not knight d4 and not knight f4, it's a very, very unusual tactical shot. Knight to c5. black goes e2, white goes king to d2. And we see the brilliancy of the idea here. It's very unusual. You can hardly ever see it in a tournament game. And when black goes knight f1 check, white wins with a king to c1. And you see that black cannot take the rook on e1 because of knight to d3 checkmate. This is extremely unusual. Well, just to finish this chapter, this combination, we can say that black can play knight e3, but then white goes knight d3 check, and after king f3, white slowly wins the pawn and wins the game. Extremely effective combination that you can almost, I have never seen anything like this in a tournament game, but the purpose I'm showing it to you that even in the end games, there is a room for imagination. There is a room for creativity. So you can create unusual positions even in the end game. Now let's look at one very, very interesting position. Well, black goes this way and white goes this way. Now, white has extra knight, but black has one pass pawn, a pawn, and the other e pawn. White's goal here to make a draw. It looks like knight can easily stop both pawns, but this is very difficult. Knight cannot stop both pawns. Let's try to stop both pawns with this knight. On knight e5, black goes a4. And after knight c4, black goes b5. And after knight a3 or knight d2, where on a3 white plays knight b3, black pushes the other pawn, e5. And after king d7, a3. And after king d6, they go a2. And after knight b3, black goes e4, and white can never catch black's pawn. So it looks like white can catch any one of black's pawns, and this is true, but they cannot catch both of them. So what is the idea? How can white possibly draw this position? And here comes mind-boggling idea. Instead of trying to stop this pawn, e pawn, or a pawn, white inspires black from moving the pass pawns. Now after knight f8, black is forced to play e5, since after a4, black cannot win, they can only lose. Knight takes e6, a3, knight d4, and after a2, knight b3. White's been successful stopping black's pass pawn. So after knight e5, knight f8, pawn is going to e5. Now instead of stopping the pawn, white follows this pawn, inspires this pawn to move. Black again has no choice. They cannot go a4 because white is going to take the pawn and catch, after knight c6, catch black's a pawn. Again, after knight f8 and e5 and knight d7, black must push e4. And again, white keeps inspiring and keeps forcing black pawn to move forward. e3, now knight d5. The crazy idea continues. White is following the e pawn. e2 and knight c3. Obviously, black must play e1 now, otherwise they lose that pawn. And here comes the perpetual check. This is absolutely fascinating idea. King a6, knight c7 check. King a7, knight b5 check. This is a tactical idea. Even though white did not really sacrifice anything, They did not do any spectacular sacrifices because this is an end game. The idea, what we just saw, that was even stronger than sacrifice. When you white did sacrifice actually the queen because white forced black's pawn blacks to promote the pawn to queen. So knight f8, e5, knight d7, e4, knight f6. This seems like absolutely illogical moves. Knight d5, e2, knight c3. That's what creates, the creativity makes chess such a beautiful game, and creativity and unusual maneuvers, unusual combinations. And after knight c3, e1, queen, knight b5, perpetual check. So this is like they are mixing two ideas, following the pawn, and they have what they are following the pawn. They try to win the pass pawn, and in the end, they game ends with a perpetual check. Very interesting, very unusual, and very creative. If you see the combination and tactics or tactics in the end game, most of the time it's quiet moves. Very quiet and very difficult to explain moves makes the combination powerful. And create very quiet move, maybe waiting move, maybe a Zugzwang, when your opponent is forced to make moves that hurts him. Well, here is the perfect example of this kind of a combination. White plays queen to c4 check, and black is forced to play queen to b4. Now, how can white win this position? Obviously, the idea should be about checkmating black's king. But let's try it. Queen c2 check, queen c6 check, queen b5. Queen c2 check, king b4. There is no way white can checkmate black. Here is, but this position is winning for white, and there is how white wins it. Knight b6. Again, this combination you can find in the endgame part of the DVDs that I made earlier. Well, knight b6 check, black is forced to play c takes b. That's the only legal move. And here, white makes absolutely shocking move. Queen to d3. And you see that black is losing here. And let's look why. If black goes b5, then white goes queen c2 with a checkmate on next move after queen b3 and queen takes b3. So pawn cannot move. You see that the other black's pawn cannot move. We have to determine that king cannot move. That leaves queen and those two pawns that black can move. Now, let's talk about queen. Let me tell you this, queen cannot move either. And here is why. Queen cannot go to c5 because then queen b3 checkmate. Anywhere queen goes, black gets checkmated. In queen goes to b5, then queen to a3 checkmate. And queen goes to e1, then queen to b3 checkmate. So now we determine that king cannot move, those two pawns cannot move, and queen cannot move. That leaves only black's g pawns. So now we determine that g5 is the only move for black. Here, what white can do, white can reach the same position as you see now on the board with black to move. White goes queen d7 check. Black cannot play b5 because queen d1 will lead to a checkmate. So black is forced to play queen b5. Now white goes queen d4 check. And after queen to b4, queen to d3. You see, we got the same position, and black has to make another move. And suppose black goes g6. We go again, queen d7 check, queen b5, queen d4 check, queen b4, and queen to d3. Again, black's move. Black goes g4. There is no other move, we know that. Queen d7 check. After queen b5, queen takes g4 check. Now black goes queen b4. Again we go queen d7 check, queen d4 check, and queen d3. As we know, queen side cannot move, so black is forced to go g5. Again we go queen d7 check, queen b5, queen d4 check, queen b4, and queen d3. You see, black has one move left only. And here, white simply wins after queen d7 check. Same maneuver we already did once. Queen takes g4 check, queen b4, queen d7 check, queen b5, queen d4 check, and a queen b4, queen d3. Now black has no more kingside pawns left. They must move some piece on the queen side, and they get checkmated. This is absolutely fascinating example of a of a Zugzwang, and here black is lost. Very interesting, very unusual, all tactical. Tactics, as I mentioned before, does not necessarily mean that one side or another sacrifices some material. Here, white did sacrifice the knight, but whole idea of the sacrificing here was quiet moves and the Zugzwang idea, and its idea of using Zugzwang in its best. Very fascinating example of endgame tactics.